welcome everyone to this next to last session. We're saving some of the best sessions for last. We've got Martin talking today, Martin Giffey de Souza, talking about social login while social distancing. Very apt little title there, Martin. Martin's, as you can tell by his shirt, is a very proud Canadian and also one of the main drivers behind today's event. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Dave, and welcome everyone. And thank you all for making this such a success. We didn't know how big it was going to be, and the Apex community has answered. So again, thank you everyone for attending and all the presenters. We'll do a final close up at the end of Connor's talk, which is the next one. And I just want to take this time to say thank you to everyone for making this happen, especially given the times. So today, I'm glad, Dave, you caught the internal joke on this. I'm going to talk about social login. There's nothing to do with social distancing, but just try to make a little bit of fun out of a bad situation. And when I talk about social login, if you're not sure what I mean, it's really things like Facebook, Twitter, and Google login. And the more technical term is OAuth 2 login. So the goal of today is really just to enable it in your applications. We're not going to cover every single feature out there. We're not going to cover all the different caveats, but enough to get you started. And our focus is going to be on Facebook login, just because there's a whole bunch of them that we could do, and I don't want to spend the time doing Facebook, then Google, then Twitter, etc. We might as well just do one and stick with it. They're all the same, give or take. They use different terminologies, but the thought process and the concepts are still all the same. So whatever we show with Facebook, I didn't choose it because I'm a Facebook fan or anything. It's just the one I decided to choose at random. So just remember that the goal is to get that. So if you're looking to get your application going with Facebook logins. So today, the outline's very simple. I'm going to do a quick intro. I'm going to talk about the process, and that's really what's happening with social logins. How does it all work, and what are we about to do? Then I'm going to go into a demo, which will take most of the time, and then I'll just wrap it up. I have some thoughts, some follow-ups. And before I skip this at the start, but if you do want to follow, there's a link at the bottom of these slides. You can go download these slides or view them online right now. I will post this same URL at the end of the presentation. And there's also a link to the GitHub repo that has this presentation. No questions. If you've been attending for a while today, you can ask in the Q&A or the chat. I've instructed Dave that if it's really relevant, he'll interrupt me and ask right away. If not, we'll ask at the end. We should have a lot of time left for questions, so please ask away. Now, before we begin, where am I? As Dave said, I'm a proud Canadian. I'm even a prouder Calgarian. I think Calgary is in Alberta, Canada. And a lot of the times when I give talks, no one has a clue where it is. Europeans all know where it is because they come vacation here. The Australians all know where it is because they come ski here, but the rest of the world doesn't always know. So there it is on a map. I still think Calgary's best city in the world. We've got the greatest outdoor show in the world called the Calgary Stampede in the summer. So once this is all over, I encourage everyone to come here and explore our great city. With that, a quick thing about myself. I've been developing with Apex for a very long time. Written several books. I'm an Apex ACE director, I'm an Oracle ACE director, and an Oracle Groundbreaker ambassador. My day job is director of innovation at InSum. Speaking of InSum, like other speakers who work for InSum, we're doing something called InSum Insiders. The first talk is on April 23rd, so check it out. In my spare time, I work on a bunch of open source projects. I'm not as active as I used to be, but trying to get there. So it's Aura open source, and there's some great projects. The two biggest ones are probably Logger and OS Utils. Recommend that you check them out. So let's go back to social login. Why do it? Most people that work with Apex in general probably work in a corporation, and they have their corporate single sign-on or LDAP authentication. And in those cases, it probably doesn't make sense unless you use OAuth 2 as your provider. But more and more, we're seeing people shift to full stack Google, full stack Microsoft 365, even Facebook now has their office, I think it's called Workplace or something like that. So we're seeing that shift. That's one business area why you want to do it. The other one is when you have public facing applications. And you want a simple way for users to log in and at the same time make it frictionless. And the easiest way is to have these types of social logins or OAuth 2 logins. And the whole reason this talk happened was because of COVID-19. In my community, I need to build an app to help out manage something within the community. And the people I was dealing with are all Facebook users. And there's no way where I'd have them do the traditional thing that we're most used to, go into a page, do a registration process, get a confirmation email, click back. I don't think anyone really wanted to do that. And especially since the group that I was dealing with was primarily Facebook users, I said, well, why not just let them use their Facebook login and then go from there? And so that's really why and where I got integrated into this or exploring it. The other reason was actually because of Apex at Home. If you've participated in some of the other talks, you know at our main website, apex@ho.me, we have an area for you to provide speaker feedback and win a hoodie. That whole thing, we had to get people's email addresses so we could actually email you if you won the hoodie. And I didn't want to have to write the whole user registration process. So we did Google and Facebook authentication so that people could log in. Now, for the record, there's been some questions. I know it's a bit side topic. There's been some questions as to or comments that people didn't want to use their personal accounts doing that. We're not keeping any of the emails. None of this, there's very little, that's all we're keeping is your name and email or holding on to. Once we send out the hoodies, we're deleting everything. So there's nothing, there's no other reason why we have it besides mailing out hoodies to people. So the process. The first thing I'm going to do is talk about what is the high-level OAuth 2 or OAuth 2 procedure look like from an Apex perspective. If you actually go and Google the workflow diagrams of OAuth 2, it's a lot more complicated than this in terms of sending handshakes back and forth. And Apex actually makes this very simple for us because they wrap it all. And I've actually written one way back when in PL SQL, and it's very complicated, and it's even more complicated to get it right. So I'll show you how it does it. But before we go into that, let's just cover the basics. And the basic is when you get to an Apex page, instead of the user entering a username and password, you'll have a button that says log in with Facebook or Google. It will then go to Facebook. Again, we're using Facebook as an example. The user will accept the permissions, right? And say, yes, I want to allow access to this application. And then Facebook sends a pass or fail back to Apex. Along with that pass or fail, it sends some data about the user. For instance, their first and last name, their email address, and anything else you ask for. And again, the user has to grant you the permission in order for you to actually retrieve it. You just can't steal it blindly. And again, just remember this very, very simple process. Apex says, hey, I want to log in using your Facebook account. Facebook asks you, the end user, do you want to allow it? And then Facebook will send, yes, they want to allow it, and here's some information back to Apex. Now, that's a very simple model, and it seems simple. Apex makes it very simple to implement. However, when I was going down this path, I discovered that it's not as straightforward as it seems. The coding for the OAuth 2 handshake is extremely easy. You don't have to do anything. It's a couple of configuration options. The question is, what do you have to do to get Facebook to work? And what are those configuration options in Apex that you have to make it work successful? So that's the first thing that I ran into when I first started this. And the second part is storing the data. As I mentioned, Facebook sends some data back, but it's not always very clear or evident where that is or how long that exists. So those are the two areas that I found that you'll spend most of your time if you're getting this going for the first time. And with that, let's go straight into the demo. So what we're going to do for this demo is we're going to start, I literally have a blank application, and you'll see what that looks like. I can show it to you here. It's got a home page and a login page. There's really nothing in it. And we're going to convert it from your traditional Apex login to a Facebook login application. The first thing we're going to do, though, before we touch any Apex, is go over the Facebook configuration. Now, I know this is not a Facebook at Home conference, but it's really important to get this right. I was actually helping someone else, one of my colleagues, a couple days ago, and she ran into a lot of different struggles with this because, again, if you don't put the right things in the right place, nothing works. And especially since we're not used to dealing with it, it's not really easy to find where to configure or what specifically do you need to put in places. You know, you can actually look online, and people have done and blogged about how to configure Facebook and Google in the Oracle community, but I found some of those blog posts are older, using the more complex methods. And so it's not always as straightforward to find out what goes where. And that's what I hope to show today. The next part we're going to do is the Apex configuration, and then the last part we're going to do is storing users' information so that you can reference it. So with that, the first thing you need to do is go into Facebook and go to developers.facebook.com. Now, I've actually got two different applications already. Apex at Home is what you've been using so far for this conference. And what you have to do is you have to add a new application. And here we're just going to call it presentation demo 1. It really doesn't matter. You enter in your contact information and you create the application. This is not really inspiring or very interesting, but I think I want to show from the start how to do this, because again, I think some people will get lost, and myself included. The next thing is you need to get your client ID and client secret. Now think of this as your Facebook developer or the application's secret token. And what that does is, when Apex is calling Facebook, it's actually saying, I really am who I say I am. And we're not talking user, we're talking Apex login will tell Facebook it's not someone random, because if anyone else tries to access this, we don't want anyone else trying to write an application using my login procedures, because then they could try and hack the accounts and do a lot of different things. So we go into settings and basic. And this application ID is what Apex refers to as the client ID. Now I'm going to go and I'm just going to copy this in a Word doc somewhere. And the application secret is called the client secret. Google calls these client IDs and client secrets, and Facebook calls them app. Now we need to enter in, you'll need to enter the password. So I'm going to enter it in here. You're actually going to see it. I will delete this after. Now this is something you don't want to share for obvious reasons. And so if you're watching this later and trying to access it, I'm going to delete this application right after. And you just click save. Now the other thing you need to do is enter in the app domain. So that's who's going to be using this. And it just essentially whitelists the application, the Apex application you have. Now my Apex application is on the Oracle Cloud. And it's a little hard to see, but it's got this random string at ATP01, and I'm using the Toronto Oracle Cloud infrastructure. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the beginning part of the URL all the way up to the .com, and that is the domain that I'm going to use. And that's it. And you'll see it actually just removes the HTTPS, and that says anyone is allowed, any application coming from that domain is allowed accessing this Facebook login procedure. The next thing you need to do is add a product. Now, I have to be cautious. I'm not an expert on this, but I guess Facebook offers different services that you can use. So I don't know what all these other ones are. So if you want to access Instagram or for instance, Messenger within your application, but all we want to do is instantiate or start up Facebook login. So you click setup. Let's try that again. Okay, so you click setup and then you'll get this screen. Just click www. Your URL is pretty much your Apex URL here. It goes, I have just all the way up to F102, so I've got this on a different page. So you paste it in there. I don't think it's that important. The rest information here, these are just how to copy code samples if you're using popular different setups. You can ignore that for now. So if you go back to Facebook login and you click on settings, there is one other thing you need to do. And that's the OAuth redirect URL. And what that is if we recap things, so Apex calls Facebook. Facebook user has to accept yes or no, and then Facebook needs to call back to Apex. Now, it doesn't know where to call back to. Sometimes it's not always the same place. And so this URL here is telling Facebook saying, hey, when you've verified the user, go send your data payload back to this URL. And what that URL looks like is it looks like your current Apex application URL here, and all the way up to ORDS. And instead of ORDS here, you just use the words apex_authentication.callback. So I've already got that here in a shortcut. And you paste that there and you click Save Changes. Now, if you can't see that or you didn't get all that, that's okay. I'm going to cover at the end, I'm going to create a manual or something just to help people out so that it's very clear what needs to go where. So don't worry if you can't see it or you can't remember everything, especially if you're watching this on video, you can kind of zoom in on it, but we'll create something later. And that's about it from a Facebook perspective. So we need to go into the Apex application, and there's one thing we need to do first before we go into our application and change the authorization or authentication. And remember that application secret and ID, we need to store it in something called web credentials. And think of that as kind of like a mini wallet for connecting to RESTful services. Now this is at the workspace level, not at your application level. So we'll call it Facebook demo, and it's just basic authentication and the client ID, and I'm going to copy and paste what we had before that I said we're going to use for later. And click create. So we're going to come back and we're going to need that in our application. So if I go back to our app, what we're going to do is add a new authentication scheme. And we're just going to click create. But first, I'm just going to run my app just to show you this is what it currently looks like. It's got basic username, password. I'm going to select pre-existing from the gallery. I'm going to call it Facebook login. And here I'm going to choose social sign-in, Facebook. This is the credentials, is the Facebook demo. And the authentication provider is Facebook. This is a default thing from Apex. And the scope, now this is where I found very difficult to start of what do I actually put in here? The documentation kind of makes reference to certain things, but you have to go find it. I think it would be great if they had direct links to Facebook and Google in there and Twitter. So this one used public profile and email, and that's what I'm asking for. So as when it pops up into the user, it says, do you want to give access to your email? And the username attribute, this will be what the Apex app user will turn into. And I'm just saying name. And the additional information I want Facebook to send back to me is down here, and it's email. So again, this is what I'm asking for as an Apex developer. I want your permissions for your public profile and your email address. When it comes back, I'm going to store your name, your full name, in the app user in Apex. And I also want to send back Facebook to send me back your email address. I'm going to create authentication scheme. Now I'm just going to go back and still make this the old one, the primary scheme. And the other thing I'm going to go back to is in Facebook, once you create it, there is a setting here called switch session. And what you want to do is switch it to enable. Now, you don't have to do this, but what it allows you to do is have multiple different authentication schemes that are allowed in your application. So where this comes in handy is if, for instance, you have Facebook, Twitter, and Google as all different login options. You have to allow, traditionally, you're only allowed one authentication scheme for the application. Now you can have a current one or a master one, and then you can allowing the URL to switch, saying we can use either one if the right URL is provided.
And very good timing with that one, Martin. A question just came in asking about Apex at home, and is that exactly how you did the multiple authentications? You just enabled that?
Yes, excellent question. So I'll actually show what that looks like. So if we go to Apex at home, perfect, I'm not logged in. So if you click here, we said speaker feedback. Now, if you click on this, you're going to get to a login screen with Facebook and Google. And in that Apex app, we actually have two authentication schemes, Facebook and Google, and we're enabling switching sessions. So that's exactly what we did. Good question, David, or whoever asked that. Thank you. So let's go to the login page. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get rid of everything that we're usually used to seeing. So if we go here, I'm just going to disable everything just to make it easy. I'm just going to do condition. I'm going to choose never. I don't want to see this. I'm just going to duplicate this. You'll see why. I'm just going to set this to never. You can delete these if you want. You can keep them. You can also, you should probably get rid of this stuff too, but just for this demo, we'll keep it simple. We're going to call this login Facebook and sign in with Facebook. Now, this is the one thing you have to change properly is instead of submitting the page, you notice how I said just get rid of all the application processes. We don't want them. Is we're going to change instead of submitting the page, we're going to go to redirect to a page. And what we're going to do is just redirect to page one, our main page. And the key thing we have to do here is in our request, we have to put authentication equals. Now this Facebook is the name that I called the authentication scheme in the previous steps that I did. So if we actually if you go and look right now at the Apex at home login, if you just scroll over the buttons, you'll see the two different URLs. One will say Apex Authentication Facebook, and the other one will say Apex Authentication Google. And that's how we essentially allow the duplicate ones. So let's just rerun this page. And now I'm going to click sign in with Facebook. And I'm already logged into Facebook. If not, it would have asked me, do I want to? So this saying, does PresDemo wants to receive your name, profile picture, and email address? You notice these are things I asked for. And I'm going to say yes. And if everything works, I am now in my Apex application that got authenticated with Facebook. And so from a technical ability, that's all you need to do. The difficult thing is, where do you get all that information? So I walk through the steps. I want to show one other thing is I use some of those keywords like public profile and email and name, and they're not the same amongst all the different providers. And so you have to look around, but this URL, and again, I will post these in like a nice simple place, has what all the different data types are that you can ask for. Right, I could have asked for user location if I wanted to get everyone's location of where they are around the world. But for Apex at home, we just wanted to keep it as simple as possible. But this is where that list is coming from. All right.
Martin,
Okay.
there's actually a couple of questions that I think it's actually not a bad idea to go back over.
Okay.
The first one is, this authentication scheme will only work for one user for the secret key as input. What about if you want a general user rather than a single user?
I'm not sure what you mean by a general user rather than a single user. So each person, the secret key is the secret key of the application. It has nothing to do with, I think we have to separate Martin, the Facebook user in this case, and Martin, the owner of the application. In this case, they were both the
Martin,
same.
the Facebook developer.
Martin, the Facebook developer, that secret key is that belongs to me. So what you'd probably have is a corporate Facebook account and use that. I don't know if that answers the question, David, or
I think it does. And the other question is related to, where do you store the password? So can you just show that again in that application?
absolutely. So first of all, it wasn't a password. I think we have to be very clear on what that is. It's the secret key, and that's the terminology people use. So if you go into App Builder, Workspace Utilities, all workspaces, and this is where it's confusing. It's not directly tied to your application. It's tied to the workspace. And if you go into Web Credentials, if you click here, I had Facebook demo, and this client ID, this is Martin, the Facebook developer's client applications client ID. So this is almost like in Apex, we have apps 101, 102, 103. This is the same thing for Facebook. And the client secret is what I had. If we go back to Facebook here, if I go into settings, basic, it's this thing here. And again, to recap why you need this and protect it. Let's say David and I both have applications on apex.oracle.com. If he finds out about we have the same base URL, right? It's the same base domain. We have the same callback function. Dave knows that this application ID exists. And let's say, Dave, you're trying to leverage my Facebook login credentials from a Martin, the developer.
Leverage, that's a wonderful word to use.
I'm trying to be the polite Canadian. The one thing that will prevent you from doing it in your application is that I have my application secret, right? It's my password to the application, which is so critical, which is why you protect it.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on this?
There is actually another one here, which is, once you've logged in, after login as a Facebook account, can we override the app user? We don't want to have emails as user IDs. We want to get the user ID set on app user.
Okay, I'm about to show, so kind of, I don't know, but what I'm about to show you might get around that. It's an excellent question. Think of app user as the display name. Don't worry about it too much as like an ID to drive things, and I'll show you why in a minute. Any other questions on this before I go?
No, that's it.
Okay. All right, so it's a great leading question. And if we look, you'll see this is my full name, all lowercase. I mean, you can tell Apex whether you want a lowercase or uppercase, irrelevant from this perspective. What I don't have is, at this point, I don't know. Remember I asked for name. I got that as my app user, but I don't know what my email address is, like what Martin, the Facebook's email address is. If I go look at session state, I don't really see it. If I go in applications items, I don't see it. I see that the user is this, but aside from that, there's nothing that I have. And that goes back to one of those primary things in the process is I have the handshaking and the login working, but I'm not capturing the data. And in order to capture the data, there's one opportunity to capture it. I'm going to go back here. When we look at this basic transaction of Apex goes to Facebook, Facebook says yes or no, Facebook sends back to Apex. It's during that transaction you have one shot in Apex to capture all that data. And it's during something in the authentication scheme called the post-authentication process. And what Facebook does is it sends one JSON payload data set back to Apex. and Apex parses it and makes it available one opportunity. And so it's your job as a developer to capture that. And you'll see a little more what this means, but let's take a sidestep here. And what do we really want to store? And this is what I'm going to, I have a table that looks something very similar to this. I've just made it super simplified here. And what we want to do is I want to store the auth source. And I'll explain that in a minute. Then we want to get your email, your name, and even your profile pic, right? It's nice if you wanted to put the user's profile pic in the top right corner, and all of this information comes back. The reason why you want auth source is, for instance, in the Apex at Home, we allow both Google and Facebook logins. And someone could have a field day right now of clicking both, but both should, in theory, have your same email address. And that way you could actually link users to each other, saying, oh, this user is the same as that user because they have the same user ID, email account. But the only differentiation that you might have is the auth source. And so this is telling you really where it's coming from. And again, when you use multiple things, it may help out in longer term initiatives of what you're trying to do. So I would highly recommend, if you're going through this effort, store where that user truly came from. And the auth ID is a unique identifier that Facebook provides that says Martin, the Facebook user, is 123. So you want to store all this information. I haven't really needed it after the fact, but it's good to store after the fact. And so the next thing, what you want to do is, I have a very simplified, I won't open it because I don't think it's necessary, but I have a post-authorization process. And what it does is I pass in this is what it's called, it's p-apex post-auth, and I pass in variables, Facebook, right? You can see that's hard-coded in there. That's not a big issue. But then the next thing is, you'll notice I'm passing an apex.json.getVarchar to, and the path is just ID. And so what this really means is, again, Facebook sending back a JSON payload with some very simple structured data. And this is the hard thing that I found confusing, is it's not really visible anywhere at any point in time. You just know it exists. I think you can see it in the debug mode. And even make it harder, the JSON data is actually in the Apex JSON package. So it's not as if it's a clob of data that you can parse yourself. It's in session, it's in like package state memory. And so that's where you need to know what all the fields are that are coming back. Now you can actually trace and debug through all of this, but I'm just simplifying it for you here, that's how I actually get the email from that Facebook's coming back with. So it comes with a JSON payload, JSON key attribute of email or name or ID, and that's how I'm storing everything. Now, let's just put this in action. So if we go back to the application and authentication, we'll go into here. I'm going to go into Facebook and I'm going to set the post. So here's the post authentication procedure name. Now this is, again, your one shot. You have to capture everything you want that Facebook sent back. So I'm going to put it there. I'm going to apply changes. Now I wasn't planning to show this, but someone asked about how to kind of have they want a user ID and app user rather than the name or the email address. What I've actually done is, in my application, I have an application ID or an application called GUserID. Now that's in my users table that I created. It's the user ID in that. In my post, in my procedure, what I have is, at the end of the post authentication scheme, I actually just set GUserID is equal to the user that I just inserted or updated. And then it's referenceable across the rest of the application. So I'll show what that looks like. We saved, let me log out now. And I'm going to sign in again with Facebook. Now, the difference this time is if I look in session state and I look at application items, if everything worked well, I'll have this application item G user ID, and it's 101. And if I actually query, or I've got a view on this where I can show all the users. And this is just a simple view that shows all the users. You'll see that this is that user ID 101. So whoever asked that question, again, great question. Now I can reference something that I have in my Apex tables that is the current user. So this is the auth ID I have. This is my username. This is my picture. Firefox. This is a problem with Firefox, and I just have it created on, created by. This is minor in the grand scheme of things, but this full name is what Facebook sent back again. David, any questions up until this point? All right.
I was trying to find the unmute button and I lost it. So there was one. Is the ID Facebook sends the same in different sessions?
Great question. You can kind of see I've been testing this, and they look the same, but they're all different. I actually don't know. They're clearly different, and I don't know if they're also associated with, again, taking a step aside, Martin, the Facebook developer, if it's a combination between that auth ID, the auth ID here that you see on screen, and then my client ID as the developer, the application's client ID, if that makes the combination of the user. But definitely I can say this, when I try and reference Facebook, for instance, to get the pictures, that auth ID is used, and that definitely links to my personal account.
Okay, and I've actually got one more that I was going to save till later, but I may as well ask it now. Mm-hmm. Can you log in with both Apex accounts and social login accounts?
Absolutely. So, great question. I wasn't planning to show it, but let's do it.
I keep bending your demonstration. Sorry.
No, these are great questions. So let's remember how I didn't on what page was it? 9999.
That's why you didn't delete it. You just changed them to never.
So let's do this again. Let's do condition. Yes, it was specifically for this question, Dave.
You knew it was coming.
So let's log out. So everyone's seen I've logged in with Facebook, and this is like if you've done the Apex at home login, this is exactly the same thing, except now we have a username and password. So here it's called Window Walk, and I just have to pull up the password in my password manager because I don't know it. So here, this is the Apex developer. This is my Apex developer login, and if I click sign in, I'm in my application, and my username is Window Walk. Now I don't have a G user ID or anything like that, but so you can have multiple things. And again, allowing that toggle flag in the configuration of switch session is so critical in order to make this happen. All right, I'll just continue on then.
I've actually got one more question. Yep. Sorry, I was going to wait, but I'll ask it now.
Yep.
The question is, does social login work on apex.oracle.com? But I'm going to change the question.
Okay.
Is there anywhere that social login doesn't work that you know of? Like, does it work on apex.oracle.com?
Yes, it does, because Apex at home, if you actually look at it, it actually is, we just did a domain name mask. It is an apex.oracle.com site. So the answer is yes, it does.
Does it work on Autonomous?
I don't know Autonomous, but I'm using the ATP, like the OCI ATP cloud, and that's what our demo is currently running on. So I'm going to go with a yes on that.
So I think that answers the question.
Yeah, sorry, but I'll even chime in here. that let's be clear that you typically need to reach out to SSL. So you would have to have a database wallet with the certificates, and you have to have outbound web services. So if you're not configured to do that, you're not using this.
Exactly. And just to augment what Joel was talking about is also, let's say you're running a local Oracle XE on your laptop, right? That's not accessible to the internet. Because remember, Facebook has to call back to a public URL to say, I logged in, here's the information. So if you're running a Docker instance of Oracle or some local VirtualBox instance of XE with Apex installed, it won't work. Even if you configure everything in SSL, Apex doesn't, what address is it going back to? So it kind of has to be a public facing site, I guess. And Joel's got some great blog posts. I forget where it is, but just Google Joel Kalman SSL configuration, and it goes over how to set that up in the ACLs in Oracle. It's not necessarily an Apex thing, but you need to do it.
Yeah, sorry, it's Karsten who did it, and I'll put the URL in the chat. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Joel. David, anything else on those? Those are some great questions.
There's one here from Mr. Wesley. I think he's Australian, to be honest. Have you had any issues with users with fancy characters in their names?
Not that I know of. Again, the first real go live was last night when we kicked this all off for Apex at home. So I'd have to go through. We did have one hiccup, but that was not part of the social login. That was a rate limiting thing Joel fixed for us very quickly. But I don't know if characters, the only thing I think would be is if you have a character that's not matching your character set, I'm not sure what Oracle would do. That's more of a database question than anything else.
Okay, and I think that wraps up the questions. So over to your wrap up.
Thanks. So just some thoughts. When you hear about social login and Facebook and OAuth 2 logins are all built in Apex, at first glance, you're like, oh, I just click 3 things and it's going to work. And in certain aspects, the actual technical handshake of OAuth 2, yes, it's very easy. The difficulties is outside of Apex, I find, of finding out what configurations do you use. And even just to find where it is, it's not as clear as what I'd like it to be. And that's not necessarily Apex's fault. I'm not used to the Facebook and the Twitter and the Google API or documentation. And the other thing is processing the return data. Again, you're not always sure what the providers send back, and it's not always clear. So it takes a bit of work to find that information. So it's all the surrounding things around it. But once you get it working, it's very nice and very easy, but just getting those configurations are probably the difficult areas of difficulty. So with this, I just run out of time with Apex, managing Apex at home and the whole COVID and everything else in life. So what I want to do is not even a blog post. What I hope to do is create a repo on GitHub where I'll post all this stuff and put it in a way that other people can put the information on how to, for instance, set up Twitter and what are the most common Twitter things that you need. And also I'll post the code I used here to handle the post authentication and a very simple users table. And the goal I'm hoping is that as a community we can augment that with different social providers and as well make it very easy and understandable, not just through a blog post that gets 2 or 3 years old because things change, but something that we can constantly update and maintain and make it very simple and straightforward for people. So that's why I said, don't worry too much about everything I show you. I'll post it out there when time permits. And with that, here's my contact information. If you follow me on Twitter, that's probably the best place to find out when that repo becomes available. I'm not far away from it. I have a bunch of screenshots. I just need some more time. So with that, I thank everyone for their time. And David, I'll take some more questions.
Sure. So there's one here. It's a bit of a curly one. Any thoughts on best approach for one authentication scheme automatically falling back to another?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, I would think it'd have to be a custom authentication route, as Ben was saying. I don't think we can do that out of the box. It'd have to be custom made to fall back to based on which way you want it to fall back to.
Well, I think one thing would be interesting to test is also, remember I said Facebook always sends you back a payload of pass or fail along with some data. It'd be interesting to say, well, what happens when the user rejects the Facebook? Look at what data comes back, or if data comes back, and then you'll probably go back to the login page. But again, you have that one small sliver of time that you can capture that and then try something else. But I haven't done it. I think it's just possible. You probably have to really think outside the box on that.
Yeah, one thing also that, that question to the end user only comes up the first time. It doesn't keep coming up each time you log in, which is, it'd be very annoying if it did. Mm-hmm. But once you've given permission, it always has permission.
That's correct.
Okay, that's it for the questions.
I'll just add this. So I've done the Google one. You've seen it in Apex at Home. It is literally the exact same thing that I showed you. But the only thing that changes is, again, that terminology of which fields, and Facebook and Google name them very similar, but I think, for instance, Facebook called it public profile, Google calls it profile, or something. There's just minor tweaks. So if you get one of them working, you can pretty much get them all. It just takes, you just have to go and read through or find the right links to understand where they are. My first attempt was just a bunch of scattered things, but I got better control. Then again, I didn't need nor want a bunch of information. And so just hopefully that encourages people that don't get discouraged, get one of them working, don't try and get everything working at the same time. And the structure you build in place, like that table, the users table, and the package code, it's the same thing I use for both Google and Facebook.